Everyone assumes the worst part of a story, like mine, is the harassment itself. It genuinely isn't. The worst part is what happens after you finally say no. Nobody warns you about that part. Nobody even really talks about it, not honestly, not in a way that prepares you for what's actually coming. I was 28, finishing my exercise science degree part-time, working mornings at a gym that paid just enough to keep my student loan from actively drowning me, not enough to get ahead. Just enough to keep treading water, month after month, in a city that never once got cheaper while I stood still. So, when my agency called with a private client, some wealthy guy in his 40s, owned a handful of companies, wanted sessions 3 times a week at his house, I said yes before they even finished the sentence. Just training, they told me. He's demanding, but he pays well above market rate. I couldn't afford to say no. Nobody in my situation could have. My roommate wasn't thrilled about it, for what it's worth. Private clients at their house, alone, 3 times a week? That's a lot of red flags for one job, she said, half joking, mostly not. I told her I'd handled worse clients at the gym, the guy who wouldn't stop asking me to dinner, the one who complained to management that I corrected his form too much. I figured a rich guy with a home gym was just a fancier version of the same annoying archetype. I was wrong about basically everything, except the fancier part. She made me promise to text her after every session for the first 2 weeks, just a thumbs up so she'd know I was fine. I kept that promise long after I stopped meaning it. I lost a chunk of my client base at the gym during those months too, without ever explaining why. I just couldn't focus, couldn't hold the easy, encouraging version of myself that the job required while carrying all of this underneath it. I remember standing in the middle of a session, spotting a client on a bench press, and having to physically remind myself to breathe because my chest had gone tight out of nowhere, some memory surfacing sideways from a smell or a tone of voice that reminded me of him. The first few weeks were fine, honestly. He was cold, barely looked at me half the time, answered emails mid-set, treated me like slightly more skilled furniture, but professional. I remember thinking I'd lucked into an easy contract. Quiet house, good pay, no drama. I even told my mom on the phone, one Sunday, that this was the easiest client I'd ever had, that the money alone made it worth the awkward silences. Then it started small, a comment about my body that I told myself was just blunt, not inappropriate. You're in better shape than my last trainer. That kind of thing. I laughed it off. Then it was hands that lingered a half-second too long adjusting my form on a lift. Accidental. I told myself that word so many times it stopped meaning anything. The way any word does, if you repeat it enough to make it hold weight, it was never built to carry. There was one session, maybe 2 weeks after that first boundary, where he made me redo a set of lunges 4 times, watching in a way that had nothing to do with checking my form. When I finally said something, "Is there an issue with the exercise?" he smiled like I'd told a joke. "No issue at all," he said. "I just like watching you work." I finished the session. I always finished the session. That was the part I couldn't explain to people afterward. Why I kept showing up. Why quitting on the spot never once felt like an option available to someone in my exact financial position. I set a boundary the first time it felt undeniable, stepped back during a stretch, said something light but clear. Let's keep it professional. He went cold in a different way after that. Sarcastic. You know how much I'm paying you, he said. Don't be ungrateful. I laughed again, because I didn't know what else to do with a sentence like that. It got worse from there, slowly enough that I kept explaining it away to myself. Comments got sharper. He'd bring up my student debt like he'd looked it up, which, I found out much later, he had. Must be nice, someone paying your bills through this economy, he said once, like a threat wearing the costume of a joke. Gaslighting, I know now to call it. At the time, it just felt like losing my grip on what was normal. He started threatening my standing with the agency whenever I pushed back. "One call from me and you're done there," he said once, calm as anything, like discussing weather. Might want to think about being a little friendlier. I started keeping a note on my phone after that. Dated entries, nothing dramatic, just what he said and when. I told myself it was for my own sanity, some proof I could point to later that I wasn't imagining the shift in him. I didn't know yet that I'd eventually need it for something much bigger than my own peace of mind. He brought up specifics about my life that made it clear he'd been paying closer attention than any client should. My student loan balance, roughly. The name of the gym I still worked mornings at. Once, chillingly, the cross streets near my apartment dropped into conversation like it was nothing. Nice neighborhood, he said. Bit far from here, though. Long commute for you. I never told him where I lived. The night it stopped being deniable was a Thursday. Session had just ended. I was packing up my kit, and he came up behind me at the door, grabbed my arm, spun me around, and pulled me into this hard, furious embrace that had nothing to do with affection. His hands went places they had no business going. I froze the way people always say you shouldn't, but you don't get a vote in that moment. I remember the specific, stupid details you remember from moments like that. The cologne he was wearing, some cedar and leather thing that I still can't smell on anyone else without my stomach dropping. The exact angle of the hallway light, a framed photo on the wall behind him shaking hands with some senator at a fundraiser, smiling the exact smile he was making at me right then. "You're mine as long as I'm paying you," he said, right against my ear, not shouted, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. I got a hand between us and shoved hard, and he let go, more surprised than resisted, I think, like it hadn't occurred to him I'd actually push back. "Get the hell off me," I said, low, my voice barely working. I grabbed my bag and left without another word, and I didn't stop shaking until I was 3 blocks from his house. It wasn't a rape. I need to say that clearly, because I spent weeks afterward almost apologizing for how much it wrecked me. Like it didn't count enough to justify the damage. It counted. His hands on me without permission, his voice in my ear telling me I was owned. That counted plenty. I told exactly one person the full details in real time. My roommate, the same night, sitting on my bed at 11 p.m., still in my workout clothes. She didn't say much, she just held my hand and let me repeat myself 3 or 4 times, the same sentences, in slightly different order, like my brain was trying to find an arrangement of the words that would make them less true. I quit the next morning, called the agency, gave some vague excuse about scheduling conflicts, hung up before they could ask follow-up questions I wasn't ready to answer. That's when the real hell started. He didn't take rejection well, not even a little. Texts first, then emails from a lawyer's address, threatening a defamation suit over nothing I'd even said publicly yet. Then a message that turned my stomach. He'd hired a private investigator to dig up what he called dirty laundry on me. Old photos, an ex-boyfriend willing to talk for the right price. He was building a smear campaign in real time and telling me about it, like a countdown clock I could watch tick. One email included a photo of me from a party 3 years earlier, one I didn't even remember him having access to, with a single line underneath. People would find this very interesting with the right context, don't you think? There was nothing in the photo. That was almost the worst part. He didn't even need real dirt, just the credible threat of manufacturing some. Can you believe that's a real thing rich men do? Hire someone to manufacture a reason nobody believes you? Before you've even said anything? What kind of person thinks of that as step 1, instead of just, I don't know, leaving people the hell alone? I stopped answering unknown numbers, started sleeping with my phone face down, so the screen lighting up wouldn't wake me at 2 a.m., because it kept happening. And then something I never expected. A post in a closed Facebook group for personal trainers, anonymous, careful, describing a client so specific I knew exactly who it was before she finished the second paragraph. Same threats, same, you know how much I pay you, same pattern, word for word, like he was reading from a script he'd used a dozen times before. 3 other women came forward within a week of that post, going up. 3. Same wealthy guy, same house, same hands, same certainty that money bought him a body, along with a body of work. One of them, a woman named Priya, a trainer out of state who'd worked with him 2 years before me, had a voice recording, 31 seconds of him saying almost the exact words he'd said to me, threatening her agency standing if she wasn't friendlier. We got on a call together, the 2 of us, before she'd even sent me the file. She sounded exactly like I must have sounded 3 weeks earlier, careful, flat, like she'd rehearsed telling the story so many times to herself that saying it out loud finally felt almost normal. He asked me to keep training him after, she said, like nothing had happened, like I'd imagine it if I brought it up again. I told her I believed every word before she'd finished the sentence. Hearing that recording for the first time, hearing someone else's fear in his voice instead of just my own memory of it, did something to me I still don't fully have words for. Relief and rage arriving at the exact same moment, tangled together so tight, I couldn't tell where one ended. He's done this before, I remember saying out loud to my empty apartment. To nobody. He's done this to other people. Somehow that made it both worse and easier to carry. The four of us started talking daily, compared timelines, compared exact phrases he'd used. The overlap was almost clinical, like he'd workshopped a method and just kept running it. We started gathering everything: screenshots, Priya's recording, written statements, dated and detailed. We didn't post any of it publicly right away. We sent it, quietly, to two investigative journalists, and this was Priya's idea, directly to three of his business partners, the ones whose names were on contracts with his companies. The fourth woman, the one I'll just call the fourth woman because she never wanted her name anywhere near this, even privately among us, had worked for him the longest. Almost 4 years. On and off. Whenever his usual trainer was unavailable, she was the one who first said out loud what none of the rest of us had quite let ourselves say yet. He's not going to stop unless something makes stopping cheaper than continuing. That sentence became the whole strategy in the end. He came at us with everything he had once he realized what was happening. Cease and desist letters from a lawyer with a name I'd later see quoted in finance publications. An offer, through an intermediary, never his own name attached, of what he called a generous settlement if we all signed away our right to ever discuss any of it, ever, to anyone. One of the four of us, a trainer named Dana, had a man show up outside her apartment building twice in 1 week, never threatening anything directly, just standing there long enough that she started varying her route home. The bribery attempt came for me specifically, a few weeks into all of it, a number, offered through the same intermediary, with a single condition. I had to convince the other three to drop it too, sign everything, walk away with him covering it as a misunderstanding. I remember sitting with that number for exactly 1 night, doing the math on my student loan, almost against my will, before I told the intermediary no the next morning. I've never been more scared of a decision in my life, and I've never been more sure of one either, both at the same time. I called Priya first, before I even told the intermediary no, just to hear another voice say out loud that I was making the right call. "Don't you dare," she said, before I'd even finished explaining. "Don't you dare take his money and leave the rest of us standing there." I didn't need much more convincing than that, honestly. Hearing her say it out loud made the decision feel less like something I was choosing alone in the dark. It dragged on for months. I want to be honest about that part. None of this happened fast, and it didn't feel triumphant while it was happening. It felt like being slowly crushed. I had nightmares, built entirely out of his voice. I flinched at unknown callers for the better part of a year. There were nights I genuinely believed he'd find a way to ruin all 4 of us before this ever saw daylight. That money like his simply didn't lose. I lost a chunk of my client base at the gym during those months too, without ever explaining why. I just couldn't focus, couldn't hold the easy, encouraging version of myself that the job required while carrying all of this underneath it. My manager pulled me aside once, gently asking if everything was okay, since 2 clients had mentioned I seemed distracted. I told her I was dealing with some personal stuff. She didn't push. I've thought about that conversation a lot since, how close I came to just telling her everything. My therapist, I started seeing one during this stretch, first time in my life, told me something I still think about. "You're not overreacting to the threats," she said. "You're reacting exactly the right amount to a genuinely dangerous situation. The problem isn't your fear. The problem is that the fear is correct." I remember thinking, well, shit, at least I'm not crazy, which isn't exactly a therapeutic breakthrough, but felt like one at the time. Dana's situation scared all of us the most, honestly. The man outside her building never said a word, never touched her, technically never did anything a police report could hold on to, but she stopped sleeping through the night. For 2 months, she started staying at her sister's place on the nights she felt watched. None of us said it directly, but we all understood the message underneath. I know where you live, and there's nothing you can prove about that fact alone. Do you know what finally moved it? Not the police. We never had enough for charges that would stick, and we knew that going in. It was his business partners. Once, 2 of the investigative pieces ran with named sources, and Priya's recording included one partner pulled out of a deal worth 8 figures within a week. then another. His name started appearing in industry newsletters attached to words like pattern of conduct instead of visionary. Reputation, it turns out, is the one thing men like that actually can't buy back once it's gone. One of the journalists told me, off the record, that the tipping point wasn't even the harassment allegations themselves, it was the bribery attempt. The fact that one of his own emails offering me money to make the others stand down had ended up in the evidence packet. Boards and investors can rationalize almost anything except getting directly implicated in an obstruction attempt. The settlement offer changed shape fast after that. Real money this time. Structured, lawyers on both sides. A mutual non-disclosure agreement neither side could weaponize later. I won't say the number. I'll say it was enough to erase most of my student loan in a single signature, and enough left over to take 4 months completely off from working, which I did, and which I needed more than I understood at the time. The four of us met in person for the first time the week everything finalized. At Priya's suggestion, she flew in specifically for it. We got a table at some mid-range restaurant none of us would remember the name of. A year later, and mostly just sat there for the first 20 minutes, not talking about him at all. Like we'd silently agreed to give ourselves one dinner where he didn't get to be the main character. Dana cried at one point, not sad exactly, more like something finally draining out of her that had been held tight for months. I understood completely. We took a photo before we left, the four of us crammed into one booth, and it's still the only photo I have where I can see, looking back at my own face, the exact moment something in me finally unclenched. I didn't become an advocate. I want to say that plainly, because I know the story people expect here. Survivor becomes spokesperson. Survivor turns pain into a platform. I didn't want any of that. I wanted quiet. I wanted my Tuesdays back. A trainer I barely know reached out a while back, having heard some fragment of the story secondhand through the industry grapevine, asking if I'd talk to a reporter doing a broader piece on wealthy clients and personal trainers. I said no. I felt a little guilty about it. For about a day, this idea that I owed some larger cause my continued exposure to a story I'd already survived once. Then I stopped feeling guilty. Surviving something doesn't obligate you to relive it, professionally for the benefit of strangers. My mom still asks sometimes if I should write a book about all of it. I tell her, maybe someday, though somewhere underneath that I know I probably never will. These days, I train out of a small private studio I rent with 2 other women, one of them Dana, actually. We stayed close after all of it. I set my own client list now. I don't take private, in-home sessions for wealthy men anymore. Full stop, no exceptions, no matter what the rate is. I learned that lesson at a price I'd never willingly pay twice. Every so often, a client still tries to offer more money for exceptions to that rule. The answer stays no, every time, no matter the number attached to it. People ask sometimes if I forgive him. I don't think that's the right question. I don't spend energy on him at all anymore, which feels like its own kind of answer. I saw his name once, maybe a year after the settlement, some minor business item in a trade publication somebody left in the studio waiting area. I read the headline, felt absolutely nothing, and turned the page. That blankness surprised me more than anger would have. I think that's what healing actually looks like sometimes. Not triumph, just quiet indifference, where a wound used to be. He didn't ruin my life, in the end, though there were entire seasons where I was sure he had. What he actually did, without meaning to, without ever once intending a single kind thing toward me, was force me into becoming someone who knows exactly what she's worth. Someone who will never again sell that number down, just because the rent was due. Some nights that feels like the only clean thing that came out of the whole mess. Most nights, that's enough. I still have days where I catch myself flinching at a raised voice that has nothing to do with him, and I let myself have those days now instead of pretending I'm further along than I am.